Cole Rush, we are going to play a game today. We're going to play a few games. We're going to play War Games today on the latest edition of Late Screening, which also, I didn't tell you this beforehand. I don't know if you've been keeping up with such things, but this is the 900th episode of the Kicking the Seat podcast.
Wow. Congrats.
Yeah, thank you.
I am constantly amazed by both the quantity and the quality of the content you put out. I think you bring a lot of interesting thoughts and ideas to the table, and I think that's why the show has been sustainable for so long. So I'm very proud of you, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. And I'm excited to have you. I mean, you've been a big part of the show for years now, and a lot of these discussions have been, I think, valuable not only for hopefully you and the audience, but for me to get different perspectives on, a lot of the movies I grew up with. And this is certainly no exception. So for those of you who may be tuning in for the first time at episode 900, every month, well, most months, because we have a couple of series that we do late screening and then page to screen, which we'll be doing next month. Page to screen is exactly what you think it is. We read a book and then we watch the movie that the book was based on. We talk about the success or failure of that adaptation. Late screening is essentially, Cole, we talk about oftentimes a movie that I've seen and, many times, often grew up with, appreciate on multiple levels. And then you, who grew up not watching a lot of movies, watching these for what turns out to be the first time, and we kind of get those different perspectives. Am I looking at it through rose-colored glasses? Are you looking at, what perspective do you bring that can help me understand the film better? And sometimes, what do you get or not get that, we kind of hash it out. It's a lot of fun. I really value these discussions, and we're going to get into it. War Games. The other day you mentioned that you are going to be part of, I don't know if we can talk about this or to what detail, but there's a scavenger hunt.
Oh yeah. I mean, I got this virtual reality headset, and it allows me to enter this virtual world, right? And I can basically go around and interact with people. I can go to school, I can go to work in there. And the creator of this virtual world has set up like this largely mythical like hunt for some massive prize. And he promised that anybody who solves all of these mysteries will take over his company and own the Oasis, which is what this network is called, by the way.
Sure. Yeah.
And I've actually solved one of the legs of the course, and it involved reciting all of Matthew Broderick's lines from War Games verbatim in time with the movie. So for this episode, you can call me Colthew Rushderick, and that I think that's completely fair and sound and sounds great, honestly.
No, it doesn't, and I'm not going to do that. Sorry.
Well, fair. I mean, then you'll just be left as one of those evil Sixers trying to, or Suxors, as the internet lingo people call them, trying to catch up to me, Parsival, the wizard, as I recite the lines of a movie. And let me tell you, Ian, that idea was stupid when I read it and when we watched Ready Player One. It's even stupider when you watch this movie. And
are you talking about the quality of the dialogue or the idea that someone would have to recite this because it's impossible because of all the computer jargon, or both?
I have virtually no problems with the dialogue. I have one minor quibble I'll talk about later, but no, it's the fact that like this is a challenge for somebody to overcome. It's incredibly stupid to me, and it's so uninspired. And I read Ready Player 2 as well, which I gave a 2 out of 10, my lowest score of all time for any book I've reviewed. And it's very similar. It's just like, oh, this person just knows everything about everything James Halliday knew. And that's just kind of put it into perspective for me. I was like, wow, like anybody who likes this movie enough to know every line, and I think he does it on his first try. Am I right about that?
It's been a while. It's been a few years since we read it, but yeah, we will talk about War Games itself, but this this actually goes back to the origin of this series, Late Screening, because that was the first book to film adaptation that we talked about. Or sorry, page to screen, and it was such a rotten adaptation for anybody who's watched and read the source material. It's a big drastic change. I don't remember how quickly or slowly he made it through the War Games part, but yeah, watching the movie again, because I haven't seen War Games in probably 20 years until for this show, Yeah, it's impossible. I mean, there are a few key lines of dialogue that, everybody knows, but if you're talking about reciting the movie verbatim, yeah, I gotta call BS on that. I don't care how hardcore a gunter you happen to be.
Yep. I think here's a fun question. What movie do you think you would be able to quote the like highest percentage of the main character's lines from? I think for me, it's Harry Potter 1 because when I was growing up, my mom had a Nissan Odyssey with a VHS player in it. But this was like at the tail end of the VHS life. DVD was starting to creep up.
Oh yeah.
So we only had two VHSs left. We had given them all away or thrown them away. And one was The Phantom Menace, and one was Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. So we watched that thing on every road trip, every single one. So I can recite almost every single line as it's going, and it's absolutely crazy.
And your parents never want to hear about that movie ever again.
Yeah, right. That's the funny thing is my parents aren't all that into fantasy. Like my mom loves the MCU and stuff like that, but um like I don't know where my love for fantasy came from. Well, Harry Potter actually, I do know. Um but yeah, they probably wouldn't even understand if I recited a line, they wouldn't know what it was from. Unless it was obvious, it had the
Oh sure.
the character's name in there. But what movie is that for you?
Debbie Does Dallas.
Never heard of it.
Someone out there did a spit take, I'm sure, but no, I am embarrassed because that was a primo joke if you're 40 years old or in your 40s as I am. But I can understand. Yes, it's a famous porno movie from the
Okay,
1970s.
so as you said it, I was like, this makes a lot of sense. Like this is probably a porn. But I didn't want to just assume, maybe it's a movie where Debbie Debbie Reynolds, goes to Dallas and Gene Kelly does a little dance with Tom the cat and it's something like
No,
that. I don't know.
none of that. For some reason, I just got like this really twisted idea in my head of a crossover film between an Oscar winner and a famous porno movie. Debbie Does the Dallas Buyers Club.
There we go. That's a
No, that
fun
would not
before
work
and
at all.
after.
Oh my God. Anyhow, no, there's no movie. I don't think, there are a few, but from start to finish, it's a nice idea. It's a great trope or whatever for a fiction novel, but not in this case. War Games certainly has a lot of memorable lines, some that just randomly pop into my head, on certain occasions. I can't exactly explain why, but when Michael Madsen is yelling, "Turn your key, sir," that is like the Triple Dent gum commercial in my head, no matter what the context. Sometimes like a kid's birthday party. Um, let's talk about War Games after this prolonged and I'm sure torturous introduction. 1983, so it's 40 years old. It's almost exactly 40 years old. Came out June 3rd. Was a pretty big hit from box office to budget, and it was one of the first films that Matthew Broderick was in. I think he had another movie in 1983, and then something the year before. This is really his breakout role, and he would go on to be in Ferris Bueller and tons of other movies. He's in No Hard Feelings right now, which I haven't seen, but I've heard good things about. This is an early role for Ali Sheedy. It's got some wonderful character actors, and I had forgotten just how many great supporting roles there are in this film. I mean, Dabney Coleman, Barry Corbin, Eddie Deason plays the wiry kind of like over caffeinated nerd that they go to go to seek help. But this is a film about a teenage, high schooler who is very good at sneaking in and changing his grades using all this technology he has in his room. His parents have no clue about what he's doing. But one day he gets it in his head that he wants to hack into a gaming company because he found a catalog saying, hey, in a few months, we're going to have all these, this huge arcade of, games you can play online. He wanted to get early access, and he stumbled into the Defense Department's brand new wargaming software called the Whopper, the WOPR. And inadvertently nearly causes World War III because he sets into motion a game called Global Thermonuclear War, which is a list of options on this menu you can play with tic-tac-toe and, all these other games and, nuclear wars there. I think there's also something about chemical warfare. But yeah, he ends up playing with his newfound girlfriend, Jennifer, played by Ali Sheedy, War Games, launching subs, hey, let's nuke Vegas, let's nuke Seattle. But it turns out as they're setting these things off, the Pentagon or whatever war room is overseeing these things, they start getting alerts that, yeah, this stuff is really happening because the computer doesn't draw a distinction between what's happening in the real world and these simulations that it runs, thousands per second. So yeah, from there it goes on, and yeah, things happen, which we'll get into. Cole, what did you think about War Games?
There were parts I very much liked about it and appreciated, but overall, I was highly unimpressed. I think the like Wikipedia article calls this a sci-fi techno-thriller. I think that the 40 years since this came out have rendered the sci-fi label moot, because like we have stuff that can do way more than this now.
Yeah.
Techno, I will give to it because at the time, like this computer wackadoo bullshit was, all new and newfangled. Thriller, no, absolutely not.
No?
I didn't find a single. Okay, I guess you could put the thriller label on it, but I just like didn't find a single thing thrilling about it. And a lot of the times I was like, the stakes feel so low because of the dramatic irony. Like, I understand that the characters believe that World War III is happening, but as a viewer, it's all the computer. And like, yes, okay, I guess I need to walk that back because like it very well could cause a nuclear holocaust. So I understand that. But yeah, it just didn't hit for me. But I do want to talk about a few things I appreciated. Number one, I think Matthew Broderick is excellent in this. I found him very charming and sort of like wry and witty, and that was entertaining. Number two, I really liked Ali Sheedy is her name.
Mhm.
And I particularly liked that relationship because like for a movie with a high schooler, I kind of expected like a very rom-com-y trope from them. Not the entire movie, but just their storyline.
Yeah.
But what I liked is like they hit it off very naturally and just kind of become friends and they have chemistry. And the movie doesn't burden itself with like forcing their story of like kind of falling for each other and becoming a little bit more than friends. It's very just like they have organic chemistry, they mesh well, and it's very sweet. It's a nice relationship. And it's interesting how that plays out. I think the war room scenes are all like very campy and funny in that way. They're just like they just feel so over the top, and especially the general who's always like, machines can't blah 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 blah. And like, the guy who's interacting with the president, just like he is unconvincing to me on the whole. In terms of like his job being at stake, it all felt very canned and unrealistic to me.
Wait, we have to talk about all this because, okay, I'll give you Barry Corbin as the general because that was kind of his
but I
shtick,
liked him. Like I was like he was kind of funny, but also like I believed his character despite some of the like little camp because it was very much like, war general who's kind of like stuck in his ways, but is kind of right about it. And they played that juxtaposition well. So I really did appreciate it. The other staffers I could give or take, I couldn't name a single one of them.
There was John McKittrick, played by Dabney Coleman, who's the guy that you seem to think has I don't know, it just doesn't seem like you took him seriously.
Well, yeah, it's not that I like didn't try, right? I see him on screen. He's like, I'm gonna have to tell the president this, and it feels to me like an actor reading a line more than like a character who is actually concerned for his job. So he was a low light for me. Whopper.
Wait. Are you talking about the blonde guy who's like he's almost like the chief of staff, or are you talking about
That's the guy I'm talking about.
Oh, I thought you were talking about McKittrick, who's the guy with the mustache.
No, he's like the head of the guy. No, I loved him. He was
Okay,
phenomenal.
good. Okay. Uncrossing the wires. All right.
Yeah, he had an interesting character, and I thought that his interactions, especially with Matthew Broderick's character, whose name I cannot remember, were like
David
really
Lightman.
fun.
Yeah.
There we go. David Lightman. Yeah, that's but yeah, no, it's the chief of staff I was talking about. It like
he was
in a way I was like kind of pining for the actual president to be there, and that would have upped the stakes for me. Like if the world is at complete risk of annihilation, like this chief of staff isn't just going to be the one they send. They're going to be like, get the president on the phone. Like it was all just very hokey to me. But I did appreciate some of the other staffers. Yeah, it was interesting. It was, I don't know, there's a lot of stuff in there that I was just like, what is going on right now? Like, and we haven't even gotten to the inventor of this Whopper, BK have it your way war machine, um, who is in effect James Halliday in this cinematic universe. And the helicopter scene, I was like, what? Like, what is just
The
hops in a helicopter to go get him?
The helicopter, I don't have a problem with the helicopter scene. And to set up this context, um, Professor Falken is the guy played by John Wood who invented the Whopper, and then mysteriously apparently died 10 years, I guess, or something like that earlier than this story takes place. Turns out he's just hiding out on this island on basically a government pension, and just like flying around pterodactyl kites or whatever.
Yep.
But so David and Jennifer go to see him for help in stopping the Whopper because Joshua is the program that is running the war games. The problem is only Falken essentially knows how to, basically break in because they had discovered the password, but then the government shut down the password, so they got to figure all this out before World War III happens in 24 hours. But he has at one point
over here.
Well, at one point, Falken basically says, "Well, what are you going to do? I mean, we're 3 miles away from a prominent target, so we're going to be the first to go. We won't even know that it's happening. It's how fast it's going to be. So just like hang out. You can sleep on the couch if you want to."
And then like, he changes his mind. He goes to get them in his helicopter.
Yes,
which they believe is somebody chasing them.
With good reason, because it's dark out on that island. There's no like street lights or anything. So they see a helicopter. My only problem with the helicopter is it goes on too long. Like it seems like he's circling them for 2 or 3 minutes. Like, are you just padding out the runtime or what's going on here?
Yeah, and then I know we're like kind of putting the cart before the horse here, but like that he helps them fix the issue by standing behind David Lightman while he fixes the issue.
Well, yeah, I mean, because I think Lightman steps in and he realizes that the best game to play is tic-tac-toe because it's an unwinnable game, and if Joshua the computer can realize that there are some games that can't be won, i.e., nuclear war, then it will essentially melt its computer brain and be like, I've got to shut everything down. How about we play a nice game of chess while I figure this all out? But so it makes sense that he would step in because he has that light bulb moment and there's seconds ticking by. So he steps in. He's like, wait, no, tic-tac-toe. So yes, Falken is standing behind him. Part of me thinks it's just like, it doesn't matter if he wins or loses. I'm not going to try that much. Great to see my old friend John again, because he and McKittrick helped pioneer this technology, which is something that I didn't even pick up on until this viewing, because at one point when David is doing his research in the library, he comes across some like microfiche and he's looking at the old newspapers and you see the byline of both men. I had never picked up on that before. I wasn't quite sure how they, really knew each other. But yeah, it was, to me, I think there was a lot of dramatic tension because even after having seen this movie half a dozen times over the course of my life and not having gone back to it in 20 years, like I said, I understand it's sort of a very smart summer blockbuster. It came out in June of '83. So they're not going to blow up the world, really. But I still felt like the people in the movie I was watching believed it, and that was good enough for me.
Yeah, I get that. I can concede that point. And I think that it is made better with the narrative device of like the newscasts showing that like they believe this is real. And yeah, I think that I didn't really know what to expect. All I know about war games is Ready Player One. And it's like not that big of a cast.
No.
And even like the extended members of it don't show up all that often. And I think it's kind of interesting how they play within that space of like only these people kind of really know what's at stake. And I do like how they deploy David Lightman in a lot of really cool scenarios, like when they lock him up and he uses the recording to get back out. He's kind of MacGyvering his way,
Yeah, that was,
through
that was a bit insane. I mean, I understand that he could figure out how to do that stuff if given the materials. I just don't know. Okay, so like he's in this Defense Department building. He gets arrested because he knows way too much about these computers and what's going on. So people think that he may be a Soviet asset. So they lock him away until basically the feds, the real feds, the ones with the handcuffs, can come and take him away to the brig or whatever. But he's in this. They lock him up in this infirmary, and he starts rummaging around, and he finds like all scissors and gauze, but then he rifles around and finds like a tape recorder, like a doctor's recorder that they'd read their results into. Maybe he watched a lot of early 80s doctor shows on TV, but it wouldn't occur to me as like a 16-year-old kid, oh yeah, they've got to have a tape recorder in here that I can use to trick the door sensor and open it. Like I don't know where that came from, but again, I believed it. It was only like afterwards I thought that's a little strange.
well, it has to be there for the plot, Ian, of course.
Right. And I also, but I did like that the guy who was guarding him, like he's the dude in the beret and the porn stash. A lot of mustaches in this movie. A lot of
In the
great
Debbie Does
mustaches.
Dallas stash.
That there is a few of them in that because it was the 70s. But that guy was like hitting on the nurse at the reception area, which is why he wasn't paying attention to what was going on with David's escape. But yeah, I just loved that he was putting all these cheesy, inappropriate lines on this person, and she was like having none of it.
Yep.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
no, that was a funny scene. I remember that now. Like I kind of forgot about it. You know, I watched it Sunday. We're recording this a few days later. But there were some funny moments like that, and she's just clearly like, get the hell out of here. And it's kind of, I don't know, it's a creative way to give him a distraction. But also kind of like show us who that character is in like 2 minutes.
right. But I also like that the way he escapes after, because okay, you break out of the infirmary, but you're still in the middle of this heavily fortified government building, which they go through a lot of pains to say these doors are, they're like 10 feet thick steel doors with like the cross locking mechanisms. So it's essentially a giant bomb shelter. If anything goes off, this is going to be what's going to be running America essentially. So they have to fortify it. How do you get out of that situation? He crawls through vents and underneath stairs and slips in with a tour
Group.
Which I'm like, okay, who's getting a tour here? But it sounded like they were like state officials almost, because in the one kind of joke they did earlier on where the tour group is getting a tour of the computer room, and the one military guy is like, okay, ma'am, if you want to press this button, and then she does, they're like, wait, not that one, and it brings up a big welcome Oklahoma tours or whatever. I felt like that was like an official state business thing with maybe some friends and family or something, but it didn't just feel like, hey, who wants to come look at this top secret government building?
I mean, that was the reading I got. I was like, oh, well, yeah, they're just touring. It's like touring the White House, just see all the stuff on the computers. Oh, and they have that little welcome message.
Yes.
Yeah,
there are tours of the White House, but they're not going to take you down to the president's
right.
nuke bunker. Like they're not going to show you the secret
No, I get
elevators
that.
and all that stuff. Yeah.
It's just like to me, it's a lot of 80s cheesiness that like was easy to get away with, in those days. And I think there's a lot of little shortcuts that the movie takes because like it had to, like, I like to compare in-movie computers, and like HAL is my number one top because like that he's in that server room and like that is HAL, but what you see is like this little monolith essentially with a little red dot in it, and the Whopper's just a bunch of Christmas lights, and and like it's a big block, and they do show like the processing room with all sorts of like readouts and other servers and stuff, but they show this lady walking around the Whopper, and she's like taking notes and shit. It's just a bunch of red and yellow lights with no labels or anything. And I'm like, how in the world does she know what this thing is doing?
Well, my wife, I watched this with my wife, and she asked me the same question, and I puzzled on it because maybe this happens to you in terms of books or even movies or albums. I don't know. But when you are so attached to something that you love it so much that when someone tries to poke a hole in it, your immediate reaction is to come up with some kind of a defense, like, "Oh, it's supposed to
Yep.
be like
Oh,
that," or "That's
absolutely.
intentional," or "You're missing the context of the other thing." So that was a hard one, but I may have come up with an answer.
You wordsmith your way into it.
Yes, in about point 0.5 seconds, because those are the kinds of couch arguments that if you don't have something immediately, then you're like, "I know this sucks." But no, but no, because the movie in general, I think, is pretty smart. Even if it's not 100% accurate, I imagine a lot of it is, I wouldn't call it science fiction, but back in 1983, the idea of a computer being able to do what the Whopper did might have seen as like, oh, this is future thinking, or we're at the dawn of AI right now. So who knows what things are going to look like 40 years from now, if there will even be a 40 years from now, who knows? But my answer to the woman with the clipboard is she was walking around it making some kind of annotations. It's not that she had to understand the labels. It could be that she was looking for specific things, because each of those lights are, it's like a grid of different lights. So she could have been walking around saying like, yep, panel 3 is working, or they
Right.
just
Oh,
have to
I
be
get that.
on.
Yeah.
She has to see that there is activity. She might be writing down there's no blanks, panels, or dead spots, like looking for a dead pixel on the TV, something like that. It's my
It's like
bullshit
when you go
rationalization.
to a fast food restaurant and you see the clipboard hanging in the restroom that's like cleaned on this date. Check.
Yes.
Cleaned on
Right.
that date. Check. Um, and that's well, so this is another kind of interesting point is like, how do you make a sci-fi computer feel real? And I guess the follow-up question is what stands the test of time? So the Whopper for me is kind of on the lower end of that spectrum because again, it's a big block with an assemblage of lights. And it's not that that's bad. It's just that like it is how it is because this movie isn't necessarily about like the Whopper itself. But what I think my problem is that there's a disconnect between Whopper and Joshua. Like I understand that Joshua is running the program on the Whopper, at least that's the connection I'm making.
Hmm.
Whereas take a look at Space Odyssey, and I think it's been a few episodes since I brought up a connection, so it's been long overdue.
At least
Where,
one, yes.
yeah, right, where Hal is speaking as a result of his programming and interacting with the people, and there's really no disconnect between like what is operating Hal and like what is speaking. Whereas the Whopper to me feels so disconnected, and then they discover that it's Joshua, and like they barely even mention the Whopper anymore, and it just like I get confused as to what exactly it is, and why it's even there. Um,
I
or
can
why
I
it's
can
called something different. I guess I'm getting into semantics here, like I'm being a little nitpicky,
No,
but it's
I
just something I was kind of confused about the entire time.
it's not nitpicky. In fact, it's something that I don't think I've ever asked until you brought it up, but it's something that has always been kind of like a little dead pixel in the back of my mind when it comes to this movie, is the separation between Joshua and the Whopper. There is no separation. It's just that the Joshua is the password that David uses to get into the system.
Right.
And he realizes that because looking through those microfiche films, when Jennifer is reading Falken's biography about, it's based, no, I think it's his wife's obituary, and saying like how they had a son, and David's like, what's the son's name? Because he goes through all of this, like I think there's a montage of him trying to figure out what the password could be, and he finally figures it might be his son's name, and it is Joshua. So from that point, David makes a connection that the Whopper programming that Falken and I guess McKittrick created is Falken's other son. In his grief, I don't know if the car accident happened before or after, but probably after, I imagine, or maybe it was beforehand because he loved his son so much that this was like his second creation. But it is just kind of this sad thing that it's almost like not quite a Frankenstein's monster. He didn't put like cybernetics into his, dead his son's
It's
body
a
or anything like
Falkenstein.
that. Falkenstein. There you go. Falkenstein's monster.
There's the episode
Ooh,
title.
yes. I love it. But my point is, from that point on, yes, you will see, I think David starts referring to the computer as Joshua and not the Whopper because he's making this connection. I think part of that is because of the anthropomorphization of the computer when he hooks that speaker up in his room. because it's not very cinematic to just have the audience read a bunch of text
Right.
across the screen, although there is a lot of that in the movie. But he hooks up a speaker so that what we're seeing is also spoken to us. It helps to personalize it and also, in a weird way, humanize the computer and draw further that connection that this isn't just a password. It's not just a computer. It means something to the person who created it.
Hmm.
Um, and it's also ironic on a deeper level that this computer was created by a man who wanted to pay homage to his son, which is the representation of life. Yet it's the thing that's going to bring up about the elimination of all life,
Right.
essentially. So yeah,
Well, and
but
it's also interesting. Like, I can't remember a scene where David interacts with like the actual physical computer, the Whopper.
he sees it because
Right.
McKittrick takes him through, when he first gets to that Defense Department building, he basically says, here's, as you've been fucking around in your bedroom, here's what's actually going on.
Yeah.
This is the computer that you've been, playing games with. This, here it is. Here's what it's doing. Here's why we need you to stop it. But yeah, there's no like mainframe or anything at the Whopper itself. And I think that might be why there's all those lights and readouts and stuff on it, because it could have just been a giant gray box with the WOPR
Right.
printed on it, but it's not cinematic. And they keep cutting back to it to show that it's thinking, it's processing. I mean, HAL, as you described, is a monolith with a glowing red eye, but you can very much do stuff with that because it is that eye. Everybody can kind of relate to that feeling of being
Right.
watched. It's different when you've got 1,000 blinking sensors. It's like you're being watched by 1,000 eyes inside a gray box. Again, who cares?
Yep. Well, I think that it is cinematic. You're completely right about that, and it's obviously way more eye-catching than anything else. I think the space I'm coming from is like I saw this movie 40 years after it came out, so I've seen
Yeah.
much different depictions. I've seen Iron Man, put screens around in his, AR world and shit. And I'm not saying either one is better for its time. It's just like, I naturally compare. Um, Instead, the Whopper to me looks like one of those wax-o-matic machines at the Brookfield Zoo.
Moldorama. It's called
That's it.
Moldorama.
I don't know why I thought wax-o-matic.
I, I'm
That
not
sounds
including
painful.
I'm not including your email on this episode, Cole, because you're gonna get some hate. Um,
I love the Moldoramas. I had like 5 of them. Not the machines, obviously, they're products.
I would love to have a Moldorama. Anyway, so yeah, I get that, and it's funny because Iron Man's a great example too of the evolution of humans' relationship to technology, because computers, as we can see in war games, they're only like 10 or 20 years. I mean, the Whopper was a sophisticated piece of machinery, but what you see in the background of that is all these giant machines with these huge, like, reel-to-reel tapes running information, all this other stuff. At one point, you see David in his room when he's loading up a computer program. He takes out like a record album-sized floppy disk
Yep.
and then puts it into this drive. Uh, Things have gotten more compact. This movie would look much different today than it did in 1983. But if you're looking at, Iron Man, when Tony Stark is doing all this, the AR enhanced computer visuals, as you mentioned, that speaks to, war games technology is very scary. And then by the time we get to Iron Man, technology can do terrible things, but people are embracing it to the point where they want to feel like they're touching it and molding it themselves, which is why I think, the movies that come out of this AI sort of generation, this period that we're in, I don't mean to sound 80 years old, it's gonna be very interesting because there's a lot of skepticism about it. I think rightfully so, because it's still something. I don't think we're quite at the dawn of the Terminator or anything like that, but we are sort of circling back to where we are with war games, with the cold open of these two guys going through what looks like a regular living room, but then they take an elevator down into the depths of the earth to operate the missile silo. They get the orders to launch World War III, and it's a giant test. And one of the reasons that McKittrick gets his Whopper program up and running is because he says, look, we've got 40% of our people down there failing this test. If we just have everything run by this computer that's connected to everything, we take out the human error so that if there is a World War III, we don't have to worry about possibly those 40% dooming everybody, although we'd all be doomed anyhow. It's more about counterstrikes. So right now with AI, we're talking about AI writing scripts and AI passing the bar exam and all this other stuff. So where do humans fit in? I feel like War Games is a great movie to watch right now that doesn't help answer those questions, but it does give some reassurance that these are questions that have been asked since technology or computers got out of, moved past a certain stage.
Mhm.
And, people are like, oh, this is unprecedented thinking. It's not. I'm glad that War Games had a happy ending. I hope that we have a happy ending. I'm
Yeah,
done
I
ranting.
think as you mentioned this, I'm searching for my Tor article about artificial intelligence because I think I wrote like 5 that were like either cool or terrifying. I'm not 100% sure. Oh yeah, here they are.
You
um,
got send me those, and I'll link them down below if people
I
can read them.
absolutely will. There is one book in particular. Oh, Hal is on here. Big surprise, right? Um, there's one book in particular that isn't on my list that I wanted to recommend that I was, kind of thinking about this. It's called When the Sparrow Falls by Neil Sharpson. And it's this excellent, like 300-page book that he originally wrote as a play. And it essentially takes place in this futuristic world in which 3 major AIs, there's like an Asiatic one, a European one, and an American one. And they basically run the entire world. But there's one country that's a holdout and it doesn't accept any AI. And this sort of like political leader dies and is revealed to have been an AI in this country. And there's like this secret agent that has to escort the AI's widow, who is also an AI, like into the country and find like his old stuff. It's absolutely fascinating. One of the best sci-fi books I've ever read. Um, it's a ton of fun, and this whole conversation is just making me think about like, oh, if you're gonna read about AI, there's a lot of great sci-fi stuff out there that I think is very interesting. And it's very far removed from the war games idea, right? Which I think is still very relevant. To your point, a lot of the things that you've discussed have changed my mind slightly. I'm not rushing back to watch this movie, but through the Ian lens, as I am often so privy to via our late screenings, I come to understand it in a new way, and I notice things that I don't know. Like, you talk about cinematography and things in a way that I'm still like training my eye to see. Um, so when you mention something like the Whopper's lights, it makes a lot more sense through that context because I'm thinking, oh, this is kind of boring, but that's coming from a place of I've seen a million iterations of this that are newer, and that doesn't mean better. They're just newer. Um, so I think that this is a jumping off point for like a deep dive into AI sci-fi is actually a really cool starting point.
Yeah, and it's also strange to think about the concept of war. I mean, as we're sitting here having this Zoom call to be, that's going to be on a podcast that's one of millions of podcasts out there, not nearly as amazing as this one, of course.
Of
Um,
course.
there are people.
Punching the chair.
No, that's right. But there are people out there right now fighting in wars. I mean, the most obvious one is the Ukraine, Russia conflict. But there are cities that are being wiped out. There are people losing their lives, and we're sitting here talking about a movie that is about war. That in sort of an abstract way, there we don't see cities getting blown up or anything, but I think the digital depictions of the effects of these nuclear bombs is very striking and very chilling, because at the end when they start playing the tic-tac-toe game and Joshua is going through all the different permutations trying to figure out how to win, we're also seeing the war game played out on a global map of all of the thousands of missiles being launched from Russia, United States, and you see the little trajectory lines, and then a giant like it's a nuclear plume, but it's basically these giant white radiating circles, and you're thinking, my God, those are people just being wiped out, and then the people right outside that radiator is being wiped out, and the entire screen just goes white, and then it starts over and over and over again. Just the idea of depicting mass death is interesting, while there's actually mass death not necessarily on that scale happening right now, but in many cases we are on the precipice of someone losing their shit and kicking off nuclear conflict.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And I think that technology can and does improve our life sometimes. I think that a lot of times tech companies will try to sell you the idea that it's improving your life when it is not. But I think that one thing it has done is, yeah, it gives us a wider perspective of the world, but it can also be a bit numbing. And this movie kind of sets that example, like, you know, when deaths rise above a certain number, or when violence reaches beyond a certain point, it is very hard, even when you see it firsthand, for the human brain to kind of comprehend that, right? And I guess when I say firsthand, I mean, like, you know, through video or on your phone, which is a statement in and of itself that I just said firsthand and I meant on your phone. You know, what does that say about technology? But I think that's exactly it. Is it shows this sort of disconnectedness, but War Games does a good job of making it feel grounded and real, despite, you know, them being in this war room. And I will say, there's another thing I appreciated about this movie was the moment of tension when they're all waiting for those trajectories to hit, and like hear from the other bases that they've walkie-talkied to. I think that was fascinating, and one of the more suspenseful scenes I've ever seen. Which is saying something, you know, because action movies do a great job of that sort of thing, but this was very much like hurry up and wait. And it was a unique sort of tension that I think a lot of modern movies don't take a chance at, because it could be viewed as boring or a slow burn. But in this case, it worked really well.
Well, I think one of the reasons it worked well, at least for me, was it's not exactly a punchline, but it's a bit of flavor to that scene, because the general gets three commanders on the line. They're basically the three people that, according to the calculations, are going to be the first locations to be hit in this strike that they think is coming from Russia. And two of them are like, "Yes, sir, we're on the line. We're waiting to, waiting further instruction, or we're monitoring or whatever." But the third guy is, I can't remember exactly what he was, but he wasn't a private, but he was someone who, basically the one who answered the phone because he was there. And he's like, "Sir, yes, sir, I don't know, I'm just waiting here." And then he's, I think, the first person, when, after the bombs are supposed to have gone off, but we don't know if it's real or if it's just in Joshua's game, there's a silence, and then he says, "We're still here, Commander." It's just the idea of someone who's not just this kind of military drone, it's an actual person. In that voice, you can hear someone who's scared, someone who probably has a family who is not in whatever bunker that they are, so they don't know what the hell's going on, and someone who's very happy to be alive when they realize that whatever's going on in that defense building is just a simulation.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I forgot about. In my head, I want to call him Patrick.
Maybe.
I don't. I highly doubt that's what his name is. He just feels like a Patrick to me.
He's Patrick now, yeah.
Yeah. So here's to you, Private Pat, PP as we call him.
No private padding and pee-pee on this show. But
I love it.
yeah, I do want to go back to briefly the bit about the relationship between David and Jennifer, because they do feel like, I mean, they weren't that far removed from being high schoolers themselves. I think Broderick was like barely 21 when he made this movie, and Sheedy was also young. But I like that it's not like he's the tech nerd who's the outcast, and she's like the popular girl. They both seem to be in those in between groups that kind of float between everybody. Like in that great scene where they're in science class and David gets sent to the office, there's like students kind of huddling in the middle of the class, and he's like telling jokes and entertaining people. And they just become friends, and you get to see this friendship evolve into a romance, but you don't get the feeling it's a screenplay romance. It's like, this is the end of the world. We've been so close and gone through so much together that we have found, each other in our last moments, potentially. Yeah, it feels like such a real relationship, and they balance each other out. Jennifer is not just the, "Hey, I'm a girl, I'm along for the ride," as all this, this man movie stuff goes on. She, when David is out on the island with her, and he's like, "Maybe we can swim for it." Or she says, "Maybe we can swim for it." And he says, "No, I never learned how to swim." And she says, "What kind of an asshole like grows up in Seattle and doesn't know how to swim?" She calls him out, but also is sensitive enough to help him out, because there's that great bit where he says, "I always thought there was going to be more time," which is not just a comment on being a teenager and saying like, "Look, I'm 16, I could die tomorrow," but it's also this idea of everybody else out there living their lives. Like, you don't know when the big light's going to come in the sky, so make the most of it.
Yeah, it sort of brings this big idea down to the ground in a way that doesn't feel too corny. It kind of serves multiple purposes. And yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed just the interplay between those two, and I thought they were two phenomenal leads. It's and again, it just kind of subverts the tropes that you expect. And I like that you mentioned that kind of occupying space between groups, because that's very much where I felt in high school. You know, I was a class clown, but like I did really well academically. So, but I was by no means, like one of the football players or anything. I just kind of got along with people and did my thing. Um, but then I would go home and play video games, so it was kind of a similar vibe. And I had a lot of friends like that who were like part of different social circles, but like we were just buddies. And I appreciate that sort of depiction. It's you expect cliques, you expect freaks and geeks, right? When you see an 80s movie with high schoolers in it. And in this case, it did something different, and I appreciated that.
And I like to think maybe it's because the movie was about something else, and so they didn't have the economy of the time to like, hey, we're gonna have a bully shoving David into a locker or something, or whatever. But I think whatever the reason, it totally works because we see him in an arcade. He's a big Galaga fan, which I think feeds into again this dehumanization. Galaga is a great game, but it's basically you're in a spaceship, and the idea is to blow up as many anonymous alien invaders as possible. So when he and Jennifer are talking about, okay, we're going to nuke first. Oh, here's Seattle, here's Nevada. There's possibly this is just because they're young, possibly because they don't think that there's anything to it. But it's not that they're blowing up spaceships; they're targeting American cities for destruction, and they're drinking tab and having a great laugh. It's yeah. There's a way to look at war games that even the lighter moments are kind of chilling because of what they say about the character's relationship to technology and the wider world.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty nice cherry on top of this whopper of a cake.
Ew, now I'm thinking of Whopper cake, and I want to eat Whopper cake. What is that? Anyhow,
Nobody's forcing you. It's all a simulation anyway, Ian.
sometimes I wonder. Anyway, this has been a stimulating, not a simulating conversation. And I'm glad that you didn't hate war games. I was a little bit scared there for a minute. And maybe someday, when this movie turns 80, I won't be around, but maybe you will. You can look back on it and say, hey, that's had some stuff going on that I didn't fully appreciate.
If there's one thing I can guarantee you, it's that I won't watch war games when it is 80.
Hey, who knows? Maybe we're gonna live to 500 years old by then, and we'll still have our vim and vigor of being, well.
There we go. We'll go to the Museum of Science and Industry to find a DVD player.
Oh, what do you mean? We'll just put it in our headset, right? The virtual tours,
We'll
man.
download it to our brain chips.
Never. That's where I draw the damn line. I'll be in the
Yep.
mountains, living off the land when that shit goes mainstream. Anyhow, Cole, thank you very much for hanging out and talking war games. Where can people find your stuff? I know you mentioned the Tor articles, which I will link down below, but what else you got going on? Where can people find you?
ColeRush.com. Any and all of your gambling industry news needs. And I was recently featured in a publishing newsletter, actually. That was super fun for one of the reviews I wrote. And yeah, I love my Tor.com work and my quilltolive.com work. So please go enjoy at your leisure.
Awesome. Well, thank you much. Next month, we will be back with Page to Screen. We're going to be continuing. This is year 6, not only of Harry Potter, but of our covering Harry Potter for Page to Screen. I just started reading Half-Blood Prince. So, yeah, exciting stuff. I'm looking forward to it.
I cannot believe it's been 6 years.
I know. It's
I still remember doing the first one, and it's just like it blows my mind that we've come so far. And that 7 is next year with 2 movies.
We got to figure out how we're going to work that one. If we're going to divide it up to like years 7 and 8, like they did with the movies, or what. But yeah, we'll figure it out. That's next year's problem.
That's a problem for future Cole and Ian.
Yes. All right. Well, it sounds like you said Cole and Ian. I don't like that either. It's about
Maybe I did.
about as bad as Whopper cake. Anyway, Cole, thanks so much, everybody. If you like this episode, please like and subscribe and check out all Cole stuff information down below. Thank you if you've made it this far for 900 audio podcast episodes, not counting all the YouTube stuff we've done and all that business. So couldn't do it without you, literally. And Cole, thanks so much. Take care. And until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, this has been War Games at 40.
Fare thee well.